The day Kevin walked out, the sound of the door slamming echoed through the house like a final sentence. I stood in our living room, staring at the space where he'd just been, surrounded by the silence he left behind. He didn't scream. He didn't cry. He simply said, "You're not my responsibility anymore. Figure it out yourself." Then he wheeled the designer suitcases I had once gifted him across the marble floor I had paid for, and disappeared. Just like that, 7 years of marriage were reduced to the sound of polished wheels on stone and a cold gust from the closing door. I collapsed into the leather armchair, my grandmother's last gift to me, feeling like I had just woken up from a very long, very cruel dream. I had always believed I was safe, that the inheritance she left me would last a lifetime. If only she could see me now, 35, alone and nearly broke. The irony burned. I had spent years running our family's charitable foundation, helping others build secure futures, while my own was slowly drained by the man I once thought I loved. Kevin had always smiled when he spoke about money. "Don't worry about the finances, darling," he'd say, his voice smooth, charming, comforting. "Trust me." And I did. I trusted him every time he brought up a new idea, a new business venture, a new investment. He made it sound like our dreams depended on it. And I signed every paper he handed me, because that's what a supportive wife was supposed to do. Right. Looking back, the first warning should have been when he asked me to step down from the foundation. "You're working too hard," he said, massaging my shoulders like a loving husband. "Let me take care of everything." That night he poured me wine, spoke about starting a family, about me focusing on being a mother and philanthropist while he dealt with the boring financial stuff. I remember how I smiled, how I believed him, how I wanted to believe. He didn't just isolate me from my career. Slowly, he pulled me away from my friends, claiming they didn't understand our lifestyle. Then from my family, saying they were jealous. I had no idea it was part of a pattern. I thought we were just growing apart from people who no longer fit in our perfect life. I laughed bitterly now, glancing around the room filled with expensive furniture and rare art. Every piece was chosen with my taste, bought with my money, and now served as silent proof of how blind I had been. The letter from the bank lay unopened on the table. I didn't need to read it. Already knew. Our accounts were empty. The investments he'd managed were worthless. The properties he said we owned didn't exist. Even the donations he made in my name were fake. Just another way to keep me feeling important while he funneled money into his own pockets. I looked down at my phone, thumb hovering over my sister Catherine's number. She had tried to warn me. "He's changing you, Emma," she had said years ago. "You used to be independent, strong." But I didn't listen. I told her she didn't understand love. I defended him. And now, admitting she was right made my stomach twist. I sat there as the sun dipped behind the skyline, watching the last light fade through tall windows. I didn't feel like crying anymore. What I felt was unfamiliar. A strange mix of anger, shame, and something else. Something sharper, stronger. I thought about the women I once helped at the foundation. Women who had lost everything but still found the strength to rebuild. I used to admire them. I never thought I'd become one of them. I had been so sure I was smarter than that. So sure I was in control. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Kevin. "Left some paperwork for you to sign. My lawyer will send it tomorrow. It's the least you can do after everything I've done for you." My fingers tightened around the phone. Everything he'd done for me. For the first time in years, I felt something that wasn't fear or regret. Felt power. Because in that moment, I realized he thought this was the end of my story. That he had written the final chapter, made me a cautionary tale. But he was wrong. This wasn't my ending. It was my beginning. I picked up the phone again, but this time I didn't hesitate. The line rang twice before my sister's voice came through. Cautious but still familiar. "Emma," she said. My voice trembled, but the words were firm. "Kathy, I need your help. Not to fix it. To fight back." There was a pause and then she replied, "I'm on my way." The next morning I woke to 27 missed calls from Kevin's lawyer and one text from Catherine. I'm outside. I brought coffee, and a forensic accountant. I opened the door to find her standing there in a sharp blazer, hair perfectly in place, eyes full of determination. Beside her stood a woman named Diana Martinez, who carried a laptop bag and looked like someone who enjoyed solving impossible problems before breakfast. First things first, Catherine said, placing coffee on the kitchen island. Have you signed anything Kevin sent? I shook my head. He's been texting non-stop about some urgent paperwork, but I've ignored it. Diana was already setting up at the table, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Good, Catherine said. Because once Diana's done digging through your finances, we'll have plenty to say to his lawyer. The next 4 hours were brutal. Diana moved methodically through every transaction from the last 7 years. I watched as spreadsheets lit up with numbers I once trusted but never understood. Every discovery was a punch to the gut. Fake investment firms, forged loan documents, money disappearing into offshore accounts. He hadn't been careless. He'd been calculated. This started just 2 weeks after your wedding, Diana said quietly, turning her screen to us. While you were on your honeymoon in Bali, writing about new beginnings in your journal, he was already setting up shell companies to move your inheritance. I stared at the dates, the names, the bank transfers. I remembered our nights on the beach, when I thought I had found forever. Lies. There's something else, Diana added. These regular payments, starting 3 years ago, to someone named Elena Summers. My blood turned cold. Elena. Kevin's assistant. The one he said we needed to manage our foundation's donations. She had always been so polite, so helpful. She sat across from me at charity events, nodding at everything I said about helping women in need. And all that time she was helping him drain me. I ran to the bathroom and barely made it before vomiting. When I returned, pale and shaking, Catherine was on the phone, her voice sharp and controlled. No, Mr. Davidson, she won't be signing anything, she said. In fact, your client should be very concerned about what we've uncovered this morning. He paused, then smiled. Yes, I'm that Catherine Miller. And if he thinks he can intimidate my sister, he clearly hasn't done his homework. Diana looked at me with a grim expression. The good news. He got sloppy. Maybe he thought you'd never check. Maybe Elena got arrogant. But we have enough here to prove intent to defraud. The word case echoed in my mind. I pictured courtrooms, headlines, the shame of it all. Everyone will know, I whispered. They'll know I let him do this to me. Catherine came over, taking my hands in hers. Emma, you're not the first woman who trusted the wrong person. You won't be the last. But you have something most don't. You have support. Resources. A chance to fight. I looked around the kitchen. Every corner was soaked in memories. I had cooked meals here while he was working late with Elena, hosted parties while he smiled and lied. All of it was poisoned now. If we do this, I said slowly, I want something specific. Catherine raised an eyebrow. What? I want to rebuild the foundation. Not just get back what he stole, I want to make it better. For the women we were supposed to help. I want to make this mean something. Diana nodded. That could actually help us. Judges like plaintiffs who try to make things right, not just get revenge. I felt something shift in me. The shame wasn't gone, but it was shrinking, being pushed aside by purpose. Then I need to do this properly. Understand everything. Not just the case, my foundation, the money, the work. I need to learn it all. Everything I let him handle. That's my sister, Catherine said, smiling with pride. Then my phone buzzed again. Why isn't Davidson getting the signed papers? Don't make this difficult, Emma. You know you're not equipped to handle things without me. I showed the message to Diana and Catherine. Catherine's face hardened. But Diana leaned forward suddenly, her eyes scanning her laptop. Wait, she said, typing quickly. When did he start using this tone with you? This language? You're not equipped. Do you remember when that began? I blinked. About 3 years ago. When he hired Elena. Diana turned the screen to us. Look at the foundation's financials. That's when the pattern changed. More aggressive, more risky. It's like. Like what? Catherine and I asked at once. Like someone else started making the decisions. Someone who didn't know the foundation's inner workings the way Kevin did. My breath caught. Are you saying? I couldn't finish the sentence. I'm saying, Diana said carefully, we might have been looking at this wrong. Kevin might not be the mastermind. He might be a pawn. Willing, yes, but not in control. Catherine leaned forward. Show me everything. As they bent over the laptop together, I stood by the window, staring out at the perfectly trimmed hedges and quiet street. The world outside moved on, unaware of the storm brewing in my once quiet life. Somewhere out there, Kevin and Elena probably thought they'd won. That I'd stay broken, humiliated, obedient. But they had no idea who I was becoming, or what was coming for them. Over the next week, my house transformed into something new. What used to be a symbol of luxury now became our command center. Diana turned the dining room into a war room. The elegant table was covered with piles of documents, laptops, and coffee cups. My crystal centerpiece was shoved aside to make room for evidence. Each morning began with strong coffee and even stronger resolve. One day, Catherine read something aloud from her tablet. Elena Summers. Berkeley grad, financial engineering. Worked at 3 major firms. Then she vanishes from the corporate world 4 years ago. She looked up at me. Right around the time she, miraculously, appeared in your life. I sat at the island counter listening. Kevin said she came from a recruitment agency. Diana snorted. Oh, she came all right. Recommended by herself. She turned her laptop toward us. The agency Kevin said he used. Registered 2 weeks before Elena was hired. Dissolved 3 weeks after. It was a shell. The address traces back to a virtual office in Delaware. My heart pounded. She created her own hiring process. But why go through all that trouble? Catherine looked thoughtful. Because your foundation wasn't her first target. She didn't just want a job, she wanted access. She slid a pile of old newspapers across the table. Diana and Catherine had been digging. Each headline told a chilling story. Wealthy families, respected charitable foundations, mysterious financial losses, scandals, bankruptcies. The names changed, but the pattern remained. A charming male partner. A skilled financial advisor. Silence. Collapse. In every case, Catherine explained, the female advisor worked through a male partner. Someone with social connections. Someone who could open doors. Felt cold all over. Just like Kevin. Catherine nodded slowly. And look at the timeline. The financial collapse always starts about 3 years in. Just like it did with you. I stared at the clippings, trying to breathe. If Elena's done this before, why didn't she run this time? Diana looked up from her screen. Because your foundation is different. You're connected to dozens of other wealthy families. Their charitable trusts. Their networks. Through you, she could access a much bigger web. The realization made my stomach turn. All those events. All those introductions I made. I thought I was expanding our foundation. I was handing her a list of future targets. I pushed back from the table, needing space, air, anything. We have to stop her. She's not just stealing, she's setting up the next phase. We will, Catherine said calmly. But we have to be careful. Elena is smart. She's been doing this a long time. What we need, Diana added, is to understand her operation from the inside. How she controls these men. How she convinces them to destroy their own families. I stared out the window again, watching joggers pass by, completely unaware of how close they were to monsters in tailored suits. Kevin, I said suddenly. He's the key. Catherine frowned. You mean he's her weak spot? Exactly. In all those other cases, the male partner disappears with the advisor. But Kevin is still here, texting, demanding signatures, acting like he's still in control. Diana's eyes widened. You think he doesn't know? I think he might not realize what she's done to the others. Or to him. If she manipulated him the same way she manipulated me, he might be useful. Willing or not, Catherine added. He made choices. But if he's still unaware of the bigger plan, he could lead us straight to her network, I finished. Catherine narrowed her eyes. Are you thinking what I think you are? I'm thinking it's time I become the version of me Kevin thinks I am. Weak, desperate, ready to sign anything. Diana looked uneasy. It's dangerous. If Elena suspects you're faking. She won't, I interrupted. She's never seen the real me. None of them have. I stood taller. For years they believed I was just a trophy wife. Socialite with no spine. That's how she's built her entire scheme, on the assumption that I'm too blind to fight back. Catherine studied me for a long moment. We'll need law enforcement, surveillance, a paper trail that looks real. I can fake account lockouts, Diana said. Make it look like Emma is scrambling for money, taking loans, losing control. He nodded. How long do we need? A few days, Catherine said. Maybe a week. I'm ready, I said, picking up my phone. It's time I answered Kevin's messages. I crafted the perfect reply, fingers steady now. Asterisk, I'm sorry for the delay. You're right, I can't handle this on my own. Can we meet to go over the paperwork? I just want this to be over. Asterisk. Within seconds, his response appeared. Asterisk, finally seeing reason. Elena and I will meet you tomorrow at the house. 2 p.m. Don't be late. Asterisk. I showed the message to Catherine and Diana. Catherine's voice was quiet but fierce. And so it begins. The hours leading up to the meeting crawled by, each one thick with anticipation. My home, once a place where I'd served cocktails and smiled for photographs, now felt like the stage of a carefully designed trap. But this time I was not the prey. Catherine and Diana were stationed across the street in a borrowed apartment, eyes locked on the surveillance feeds. Microphones, cameras, and motion sensors had turned my living room into a fortress of hidden eyes. I wasn't alone, even if I would appear to be. I dressed with intention, an old designer dress that hung looser than it used to, giving the illusion of stress and weight loss. My makeup was just heavy enough to suggest sleepless nights. Every detail was crafted to tell the story they expected. A woman falling apart, desperate for closure. At exactly 2 p.m., I heard the familiar sound of Kevin's key in the door. Of course he still had it. Of course he didn't ask permission. That had always been his way, taking what he wanted without thinking twice. He stepped inside, and behind him came Elena, calm and cold, her tailored suit perfect, her expression unreadable. Emma, Kevin said, flashing that same condescending smile he always used when trying to win. You're looking well. Exactly what he expected to see. Elena wasted no time. She sat at the coffee table and opened her laptop. Let's make this quick, she said, not meeting my eyes. We've brought the paperwork. Once you sign, we can all move on. I nodded slowly, playing the part. I want to make sure I understand what I'm signing. You always said I should understand the paperwork, Kevin. He smiled, reassured by my hesitation. Of course, darling. Simple. These documents separate our assets. They dissolve the foundation. Clean, legal, and fast. I let my voice shake. But the projects, the women we were helping. Elena answered this time, her tone measured. Sometimes hard decisions must be made. The finances are too complicated now. This is the best solution for everyone. I picked up the papers with trembling hands, made a show of trying to read them through tears. I thought everything we built. Kevin cut in sharply. What we built was a fantasy, Emma. You're not equipped to run a foundation. You never were. That's why you needed me. You still do. From the corner of my eye, I watched Elena's reaction. A small twitch at the corner of her mouth. Satisfaction. She liked watching him belittle me. She liked control. Before I signed, I looked up. What about the recent donations? For the Women's Shelter Project. Another glance between them. Elena spoke first. Those funds were unfortunately lost. Poor investments. Market downturns. Like the ones through Globe Enterprises? Asked, my voice innocent. The shift in the room was instant. Elena's fingers froze on her keyboard. Kevin's face lost a shade of color. I don't know what you're talking about, he said, but his voice cracked. I thought I saw that name on some paperwork, I said, still feigning confusion. There were so many. Globe Enterprises, Sunset Holdings, Marina Partners. I named 3 more shell companies. Each one was part of the web they'd spun. Each name struck a nerve. Elena's mask slipped for just a second. Her voice grew colder. Those are legitimate investment vehicles. Not that you'd understand. You're right, I said, letting my eyes fill with tears. I never understood finance. That's why I hired that accounting firm last week. To help me figure it out. The room went still. Kevin paled. What accounting firm? Oh, Diana something, I said, pretending to search my memory. They're still going through everything, but they said they'd have a full report soon. Elena stood abruptly. This meeting is over. But Kevin didn't move. His eyes were on me, searching. Diana Martinez? He asked, voice hoarse. I widened my eyes, keeping my voice soft. Yes. Do you know her? Elena grabbed his arm. We're leaving. Why? I asked, finally letting steel enter my voice. Is there something about Diana Martinez that bothers you, Elena? Or should I say, Rebecca Thompson? That was your name in Seattle, wasn't it? Before the Harrison Foundation collapsed. Elena's expression changed completely. The professional calm disappeared. What remained was cold and dangerous. Who have you been talking to? Does it matter? Said, standing now. The trembling wife was gone. What matters is what I found. What Diana found. What the FBI is finding right now in all those clever little shell companies. Kevin's gaze darted between us. Elena. What's going on? What happened in Seattle? She's lying. Elena snapped. She's desperate. She's trying to ruin. No, I interrupted. I'm finally telling the truth. Just like the Harrisons did. And the Montgomerys in Chicago. And the Pearsons in Atlanta. Should I keep going? Elena made a move for her laptop, but Kevin stopped her. Wait, what does she mean? What happened to those families? Elena. What did you do? I stepped closer. Show him, Elena. Show him what happens to every family you target. Show him what you were planning to do to Margaret Webster's foundation next. His grip tightened. Margaret. My Margaret. And there it was. Elena's biggest mistake. In her arrogance, she had already begun setting up her next scam, without telling Kevin. Elena, he said, voice shaking. What did you do? The FBI is outside, I said calmly. And inside. And across the street. It's over, Elena. The only question now is whether Kevin wants to go down with you. Or admit how completely you used him too. Elena bolted for the door, but she didn't get far. The agents swarmed in, catching her before she could leave. Kevin stood frozen as the truth crashed over him. Catherine stepped into the room, followed by federal prosecutors and Diana with boxes of evidence. In the chaos, I just stood there, watching them lead Elena away in handcuffs. Her expression was no longer smug. It was hollow. And for the first time I felt no fear, no shame, just purpose. This wasn't just for me anymore. It was for every woman she'd tried to break. It was only the beginning. Hours later, the house was quiet again, but the energy inside me had changed. I stood at the same window where I once watched Kevin leave. Only this time I wasn't crumbling, I was rising. Catherine walked in with Diana, both of them holding fresh files and updates. Before they could speak, my phone buzzed. It was Margaret. Her voice trembled. Emma, I need to talk to you. It's about Kevin. About Elena. Come over, I said without thinking. When she arrived, she looked nothing like the composed woman I remembered. Her eyes were red, her hands shaking as she pulled a folded letter from her purse. "This arrived this morning," she said. I opened it and felt a chill run through me. It was elegant, polished, terrifying. A veiled threat warning Margaret to stay silent or her late husband's business dealings would be leaked to the press. They had found her weakness, her children's future, her late husband's name, and they were using it like they always did. Quiet, precise pressure. "They're trying to silence you," I said, holding the letter tighter. "I can't let them destroy Thomas's legacy," Margaret whispered, tears slipping down her cheeks. "But I can't help you if it puts my kids at risk." I glanced at Diana, who had already begun scanning the letter's language and formatting. "This isn't some panicked blackmail," she said. "This is organized, calculated. And it's not just about you, Margaret. They've used this method before." "Tell me everything you know about Thomas's business," I said. "All of it. Especially anything that might have seemed off." For the next 2 hours Margaret talked. I listened, took notes, and compared what she said with names and dates Diana pulled up. At first, it seemed disconnected. Business ventures, development deals, partnerships with firms that didn't raise red flags. But then she mentioned one. A Phoenix development project from 2015. Froze. "Wait, Phoenix? 2015? "Yes," Margaret said. "It was one of his last major deals before he got sick." I turned to my computer, pulling up old files. My father had a project in Phoenix that same year. The same type of permits. The same valuations. These numbers match. Almost exactly. Diana's voice sharpened. "Let me cross-reference." Her fingers flew. The tension in the room grew thick. "Oh no," she muttered. Margaret. That project never existed." "Not really. The documents were real. The permits were processed. But it was all smoke and mirrors. Both families were funneled into the same fake development. Money routed through the same shell companies." A name flashed across the screen. Victoria Pierce. The realization hit hard. Victoria Pierce. Elena's mentor. "She's in every file," Diana said. "Every major scheme. She was laying the groundwork before Elena even entered your life." Margaret's face turned pale. "If they can dig this deep, know this much about their targets, they can blackmail anyone," I finished. "It's not just about stealing money. It's about leverage." "They used Thomas," Margaret whispered. "And now they're using me." "They underestimated you," I said. "Just like they underestimated me." For the first time that night, Margaret's eyes narrowed with something other than fear. "They think I'm just a grieving widow." "Exactly," I said. "Just like I was supposed to be a helpless ex-wife. But they're wrong." I called up Diana again. "We need a deeper scan. Look for this Phoenix pattern across the other families. Any overlap. Any project where 2 or more targets were involved." "I'll do it," Diana said. "And Emma, if what you're thinking is true, we're not dealing with isolated attacks. We're looking at a full-scale network." I turned to Margaret. "We'll compare your late husband's records with my father's. Let's find every single place their fingers touched." "And then what?" Margaret asked. "Then we turn their own tools against them." We got to work. More names came up. More overlapping deals. More ghost projects. We created a wall of patterns. Across years, cities, industries. The picture became clear. They weren't just taking money. They were creating a system. A legitimate empire built on stolen resources. I pulled out my contact list. All the women Elena's files had mentioned. Some had been directly targeted. Others marked for future exploitation. Each one had something in common. They were underestimated. "Margaret," I said, "how do you feel about making some calls?" She straightened. "Who are we calling first?" "Victoria Chen in San Francisco," I said. "Her husband's tech company was in another ghost deal. She probably doesn't even know." Margaret pulled out her phone, no hesitation now. They thought we'd break, she said, voice steady. They never thought we'd fight. They don't know us, I said. But they will. By the end of that week, everything had changed. The conference room at Catherine's law firm became our new war room. Around the table sat 7 women, each with a different story but the same bruised core, betrayal. Margaret and I had spent days reaching out to the names on Elena's old files. Not everyone answered. Not everyone believed us. But the ones who did brought something powerful. Proof, patterns, pieces of a puzzle we were finally fitting together. Victoria Chen flew in from San Francisco. Her late husband had been approached by a man named Michael Crawford just weeks before his sudden company collapse. He came with a partnership proposal, she explained, tapping on her tablet. Said he had government ties. It all seemed clean. Until it wasn't. Diana's eyes narrowed. Michael Crawford was Elena's handler in the Seattle operation. Same pattern. Same playbook. Just new names. Helen Blake from Chicago leaned forward. They silenced me with threats. Said my husband had made questionable trades. But they were the ones who orchestrated those trades behind the scenes. When I started asking about the foundation's missing funds, they blackmailed me into silence. Rebecca Torres from Miami added, they thought we'd stay isolated. Shame. That we'd never connect the dots. But we had. Piece by piece, we had turned our tragedies into a map of their network. Diana stood and projected a digital timeline across the screen. Names, dates, transactions, shell companies. They weren't just taking money, she said. They were collecting leverage. Building a web of compromised people. Business leaders, heirs, board members. A quiet army of silence and obedience. This isn't just fraud, I said, staring at the pattern. This is control. Helen nodded grimly. That's how they silenced me. They controlled what I feared most. And now, Catherine said from the head of the table, we silence them. We've identified 37 victims across 12 cities, Diana added. 22 have already agreed to cooperate. It was happening. The story was no longer just mine. It belonged to all of us. But just as hope began to rise, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Asterisk, you should be careful who you invite into your little support group, Emma. Not everyone is who they claim to be. Asterisk. I read it out loud. The room went cold. They know, Diana said quietly. Someone in their network knows about this meeting. The message had been sent from a burner phone. Untraceable. Which means, Catherine said, we may have a leak. We all looked around. 7 women. 7 stories. But now suspicion slithered in. What if one of those stories wasn't true? What if someone in this room was still playing for the other side? This is what they want, I said firmly. For us to doubt each other. To turn against each other before we grow too strong. But how can we know? Victoria asked, her voice tight. How can we be sure we're all real? Understood. By doing what they never expect. Complete transparency. I turned to face them. I'll go first. I'll tell you everything. Every mistake. Every blind spot. Every choice I regret. Then you can decide for yourselves whether to trust me. And I ask that each of you do the same. No secrets. No shame. Margaret stood beside me. I'll go next. One by one we all shared. 4 hours. Raw, painful truths laid bare. Diana recorded it all. Not for evidence. For clarity. For trust. During Rebecca's story, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. Wait, I interrupted. That investment firm in the Cayman Islands. What was the name? Blue Horizon Partners, she said. They handled the offshore transfers. Victoria's face went pale. That's the same firm that approached my CEO. Different paperwork, but same logo. Diana typed furiously. The logo's registered to a holding company owned by Victoria Pierce. There she was. The real mastermind. Lena's mentor. The name that haunted every file. Every shell company. Every fall. This isn't fraud, Catherine said slowly. This is a hostile takeover. Of lives. of reputations, of legacy. Diana projected a map on the wall. Dozens of properties bought under different names in different cities, but all traced back to one network. They're building a real estate empire, Diana said. Using stolen money, collapsed families, and charitable fronts as cover. They're using our own money and connections, I whispered, to build the next phase of their operation. And then my phone buzzed again. Asterisk smart girl Emma. You're finally seeing the bigger picture. But can you see the whole board? Check your email. Asterisk. Opened it. List of names. Some I recognized. Some I didn't. But all were wealthy, powerful, respected. At the bottom a chilling note. Asterisk next year's targets. Stop now or they all get special attention. Asterisk. I showed it to the room. They think this will scare us, I said, voice steady. They think we'll back down. They still don't understand who we are, Rebecca replied. Not anymore. No, I said. They don't. And that's going to be their mistake. Margaret looked at me. So, what's the plan? I smiled for the first time in hours. We warn every name on this list. We expose every shell company. We investigate every property. And we send Victoria Pierce a message. Helen raised an eyebrow. What kind of message? The kind that says we're done hiding. The kind that reminds her. The women she thought were victims have become her worst nightmare. The day we struck back didn't feel dramatic. It started like any other. Soft light creeping through the blinds, the quiet hum of city traffic outside. But beneath the surface, there was tension in the air. Electricity. The kind that comes before a storm. Our plan had taken weeks. Coordinated across cities. Every detail checked, every connection verified. Victoria Chen's tech team traced the digital fingerprints of Pierce's organization. Helen Blake used her real estate contacts to dig up property records. Margaret unraveled financial trails designed to stay hidden. Catherine and Diana stitched it all together with legal precision. We weren't just aiming to expose them. We wanted to dismantle everything they'd built. At 8 a.m. I sat in my study, phone in hand, eyes on the news. Right on time, the breaking banner flashed across the screen. Asterisk major financial fraud network exposed. Federal raids in 12 cities. Asterisk. My phone buzzed with a message from Catherine. Asterisk it's done. They didn't see it coming. We got everything, including the servers. Asterisk. I allowed myself a breath. We had known Victoria Pierce wouldn't be caught easily. But the servers were the real prize. They held everything, emails, contracts, photos, audio files. Years of quiet destruction, perfectly documented. Diana arrived 20 minutes later, eyes sharp, laptop under her arm. She placed it on the table and opened it without a word. You need to see this. She pulled up a new file, one we hadn't found before. Remember those property records, she said. Turns out we missed something. On the screen appeared a sprawling chart of holding companies, investment vehicles, management groups. It looked like everything we already knew. But as she zoomed in on one small branch, I felt my body go still. The Millbrook Foundation. My breath caught. That's my family's foundation. The one your grandmother started, Diana said gently. The one Elena used to gain access to your life. But we shut it down after the investigation. No, she said. You shut down the public-facing part. But the legal entity still exists. And according to these records, it's now a majority shareholder in several of Pierce's most legitimate holdings. I stared at the screen as the horror settled in. They've been using my foundation to launder legitimacy. Name. My family's name. They've been hiding behind it for years. It gets worse, Diana said. The non-profit status gives them cover for nearly all their transactions. Real estate, venture capital, even overseas accounts. Every move looks clean. On paper, they've used you to make their empire look noble. I sank into my chair. Everything felt heavier. All those events I had hosted. All the people I had introduced to the foundation. They weren't just using me. I had unknowingly helped them expand. I was never their victim, I whispered. I was their blueprint. Just then my phone buzzed. Another message from an unknown number. Asterisk, finally figured it out, didn't you? You were always our best investment, Emma. Wealth, success, idealism. You had it all. Elena's only mistake was getting greedy. But now you've forced our hand, asterisk. The next message followed seconds later. Asterisk, check your email. You have 1 hour to call off the investigation. Or everyone learns how deeply you were involved. We have everything, photos, signatures, meetings. Enough to ruin you, asterisk. I opened the email. And there it was. Dozens of documents. Carefully selected to paint a specific story. Photos of me at meetings, real ones but taken out of context. Emails I had written with innocent intent now twisted. My signature on paperwork I hadn't fully read, now labeled as authorizations for fraud. They were going to make me look like the mastermind. I stared at the screen, my chest tight. They're going to destroy me. No, said a voice from the doorway. Margaret stepped in, followed by Helen, Victoria Chen, and Catherine. They're going to try, Margaret said, her voice calm. But they're going to fail. We saw the same email, Victoria said. My team's already on it. It's good, I'll admit that. But not perfect. We can prove it's been doctored. But it'll take time, I said quietly. And once they release it. Let them, Helen interrupted. Let them try to paint you as the villain. Because we're going to tell the real story. All of us. Margaret nodded. We'll testify. That we never met you before this. That you weren't involved. That you helped stop them, not support them. And we're going to get ahead of this, Catherine said. You're going to tell your story. Your real story. Not just about Kevin and Elena, but about how you pulled this alliance together. How you exposed Pierce's empire. She held up her phone. I have a journalist at the Financial Times. He's ready to run a full spread. You give him everything and we go public. Today. I looked at the women surrounding me. Each one wants a target. Now a protector. My protectors. If we do this, I said, they'll come after all of you too. Good, Victoria said, her smile fierce. Let them try. Helen nodded. They taught us how to be ruthless. Now they'll see what that really means. My phone buzzed one last time. Asterisk, time's running out, Emma. Make the call, asterisk. I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I picked up my phone and dialed. This is Emma Miller, I said to the reporter. And I have a story to tell. As my words echoed through the room, Diana's laptop pinged with fresh alerts. Pierce's empire, once invisible and untouchable, was unraveling. And somewhere, I knew Victoria Pierce was watching it fall. She had taught us how to break systems, how to manipulate weakness. But she had made one fatal mistake. She forgot what happens when women stop being afraid. The morning after my interview went live, the world felt different. Heavier, louder. My phone lit up with hundreds of messages. Some were filled with rage, others with support. But the truth was out. My face, my name, and my story were on every major outlet. The Financial Times headline read, Asterisk, Emma Miller exposes decade-long fraud ring hidden beneath elite foundations. Asterisk, underneath it was a photo of me. One I hadn't posed for. Standing in front of the Millbrook Foundation building, chin lifted, eyes steady. Catherine texted, Asterisk, turn on channel 7. Asterisk. I clicked on the TV, heart thudding, and there he was, Kevin. My husband. My betrayer. I passed. Being led out of his apartment in handcuffs. His designer suit was wrinkled. His face looked pale, tired, smaller somehow. The man who had once controlled everything in my life now looked like he didn't even know how to stand on his own. The ticker at the bottom read, Asterisk, Kevin Miller turns state witness in multi-billion-dollar fraud case. Asterisk. I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't even feel rage. Just a quiet, hollow recognition that I'd never really known the man who once promised to love me. Diana arrived minutes later with a thick manila envelope and a look I didn't like. "You need to see this," she said. Inside the envelope were photos. Surveillance shots. Dozens of them. Me at charity events. Me at fundraisers. Me walking down streets I barely remembered. And in almost every frame in the background was the same face. Victoria Pierce. Watching me. Studying me. Years before Elena. Years before Kevin. At my college graduation. At my grandmother's funeral. Even at the first gala I ever hosted. "She's been following you for over a decade," Diana said. "Before Elena. Before Kevin. Before everything." My hands shook as I set the photos down. "Why?" "Because you weren't just a random target," she said. "You were the template." She handed me a note that had been included with the envelope. The handwriting was neat, elegant. The message was simple. Asterisk. "You're playing a game you don't understand. Ask yourself, Emma. Who really chose Elena? Who guided Kevin to your foundation? Nothing in your life has been accidental. Nothing." Asterisk. I felt like the floor beneath me shifted. Every decision I thought I had made. Every relationship I believed I had built. Had it all been orchestrated? Was I ever truly free? My computer pinged. A flood of email notifications filled the screen. Margaret called. "Turn it on now. Open the files." Thousands of them. Internal foundation emails. Financial records. Meeting minutes. But they weren't the manipulated versions Pierce had threatened to release. These were originals. Untouched. And they told a very different story. "They're trying to bury you in information," Victoria Chen said as she walked in. "It's classic misdirection. Make it too much to sort through. Hope the world gives up before the truth is found." But one file caught my eye. Board meeting minutes. From 15 years ago. I opened them, scanned the names. And stopped. "Dr. Elizabeth Pierce." I whispered. "Why is she listed as a consultant on my foundation board?" Catherine walked in just as the words left my mouth. "Elizabeth Pierce. That's Victoria's mother." "She was my grandmother's doctor," I said, heart racing. "She helped her during her final illness. She helped her set up the foundation succession plan." It all came rushing back. Those nights at my grandmother's bedside. Her long talks with Dr. Pierce. The sudden change in her will. My father being removed. Me being named the heir. "She didn't just find me," I whispered. "She made me." Diana's fingers raced over her keyboard. "Emma, you need to see this." On the screen appeared a line of code, connecting a chain of shell companies directly back to a single non-profit, the Millbrook Foundation. "Emma," she said softly, "they used your grandmother's foundation as a test model. It wasn't just a target, it was their prototype. Every other family they've destroyed. They practiced first with you." My phone buzzed again. New message. No name. No signature. Asterisk, "Now you're understanding. Your grandmother's foundation wasn't just a target. It was the blueprint. Everything we've done since. We learned from watching yours crumble from the inside. You should be proud. Your family taught us how to break the best." Asterisk. I stared at the screen, pulse pounding. I should have felt broken. Instead I felt fire. They had followed me, shaped me, orchestrated me. But they had made one mistake. They thought pain would make me pliable. They thought betrayal would make me quiet. They didn't realize that they had forged something much more dangerous. Me. I stood up and looked around at the women in my living room. My allies. My army. "They think this is the end," I said. "But it's just the beginning." That night sleep didn't come. I sat in the quiet of my kitchen, the city humming faintly beyond the glass windows, the edges of dawn still hidden behind dark clouds. Margaret was the first to arrive. Then Helen. Victoria Chen followed, her laptop already open before she even took her seat. Catherine walked in last, holding a fresh stack of subpoenas and with that relentless look in her eyes that told me she hadn't slept either. This was no longer about one woman being scammed by a charming man. This was about dismantling an empire built on secrets, shadows, and stolen futures. We weren't just survivors anymore. We were the front line. What now? Margaret asked quietly. I looked at each of them. Women who had been underestimated, manipulated, threatened. Women who were supposed to stay quiet. Now, I said, we do what we promised. We rebuild. Not just for ourselves, but for every woman they marked, every family they circled, every voice they tried to silence. Diana joined us minutes later, her eyes sharp, her hands clutching a fresh batch of data. There will be others like Victoria Pierce, she said. Hidden. Waiting. Watching. Good, I replied, standing taller than I'd felt in years. Because now there are people like us too. And we're not hiding anymore. As if on cue, my phone buzzed one final time. A message from an unknown number. The last piece of the game they thought they were still playing. Asterisk. You'll never find all of us. Asterisk. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I smiled. Not a bitter smile. Not a broken one. Real one. I looked around at the women in my kitchen. Each of us scarred but not shattered. Changed but not controlled. Watch us, I whispered and turned the phone off. The sun finally broke across the skyline, painting everything in light. Outside, the world was just waking up to the headlines. Fraud exposed, legacies shattered, masks ripped away. But in that kitchen we were already looking ahead. They had tried to break us. Instead they had built something they couldn't control. A sisterhood of survivors. A force made of truth, resilience, and steel. They created us to be victims. We became their reckoning. And my grandmother, whose name they tried to corrupt, would have been proud. And for the first time in my life so was I.